Secretary of State Griswold, how much did Soros pay you to kick Trump off the ballot?
$10 million.
Why do you take Soros donations? How much did Soros pay you? Hey Antifa, why are you blocking the road? It's illegal. Is this an insurrection? Why are you guys committing an insurrection?
All right, now hold it up here. You don't know what it is.
Punch Nazis, that's nice.
Meanwhile,
the framers of Section 3 knew from painful experience that those who had violently broken their oaths to the Constitution couldn't be trusted to hold power again because they could dismantle our constitutional democracy from within. The reason we're here is that President Trump tried to disenfranchise 80 million Americans who voted against him, and the Constitution doesn't require that he be given another chance.
Now, this issue of disenfranchisement came up in particular because Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was appointed by former President Trump, was asking whether or not Colorado was going to be disenfranchising its voters by not putting Trump on the ballot. We also, though, heard from a liberal justice, Alega Kagan, who was saying, well, why should one state decide who's the president of the United States? So while we don't know exactly what the court is going to do, they did seem to be leaning against Colorado.
So, you know, I've watched over 400 Supreme Court arguments. I've done 50 myself. I would tell you this argument did not go well for the Trump challengers, and that's to put it mildly. I probably have some other adjectives that I won't say on air. You know, the thing that I was watching for was any indication anywhere about just how dangerous a ruling to overturn the Colorado Supreme Court was. We heard a lot from the court, particularly the Chief Justice, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Alito, about how if you affirm the Colorado decision, it'll empower states to mess with federal elections.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about the Supreme Court hearing the case out of Colorado to try to ban Trump from the ballot using the 14th Amendment, the insurrection clause. And it did not go well, okay? It actually went so bad that even the mainstream liberal media, far-left outlets, Trump-deranged outlets like MSNBC, they're admitting that, yeah, this might be a 9-0 decision in favor of Trump, okay? And I want to talk about this because, again, this is how bad the argument is from liberals, that even the liberals on the Supreme Court seem inclined, or at least it's predicted, that they're going to go along with the Trump lawyers, the people arguing on behalf of Trump standing on the ballot. And this is just an indication of how silly all of this is, because there is no reason why you should kick somebody off the ballot or not allow somebody to run for president or federal office based off the insurrection clause when they haven't even been criminally charged with insurrection or the event that you're calling an insurrection. Nobody that participated in that event has actually been criminally charged with an act of insurrection. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, this is Trump derangement, peak Trump derangement. And the Trump deranged lawyers that are representing the Trump deranged voters that bought this case against Trump in the first place, trying to keep him off the ballot, they got their asses handed to them by the Supreme Court justices. Take a look.
States have created under their Article 1 and Article 2 powers to run elections.
But it would seem that particularly after Reconstruction and after the Compromise of 1877 and during the period of Redeemers, that you would have that kind of conflict. There were a plethora of Confederates still around. There were any number of people who would continue to either run for state offices or national offices. So it would seem that would suggest that there would at least be a few examples of national candidates being disqualified, if your reading is correct.
Well, there were certainly national candidates who were disqualified by Congress refusing to seat them.
I understand that, but that's not this case. Did states disqualify them? That's what we're talking about here. I understand Congress would not seat them.
Other than the example I gave, no. But again, Your Honor, that's not surprising because there wouldn't have been – states certainly wouldn't have the authority to remove a sitting federal officer. So what's the purpose of what was the purpose of Section 3? The states were sending people. The concern was that the former Confederate states would continue being bad actors. And the effort was to prevent them from doing this. And you're saying that, well, this also authorized states
to disqualify candidates. So what I'm asking you for, if you are right, what are the examples?
Well, Your Honor, the examples are states excluded many candidates for state office, individuals holding state offices. We have a number of published cases of states considering that.
I understand that. I understand the states controlling state elections and state positions. What we are talking about here are national candidates.
The more broad point I want to make is that what is very clear from the history is that the framers were concerned about charismatic rebels who might rise through the ranks up to and including the presidency of the United States.
But then why didn't they put the word president in the very enumerated list in Section 3? The thing that really is troubling to me is I totally understand your argument, but they were listing people that were barred, and president is not there. And so I guess that just makes me worry that maybe they weren't focusing on the president and, for example, the fact that electors of vice president and president are there suggests that really what they thought was if we're worried about the charismatic person, we're going to bar insurrectionist electors, and therefore that person is never going to rise.
This came up in the debates in Congress over Section 3, where Reverdy Johnson said, why haven't you included president and vice president in the language? And Senator Morrill responds, we have. Look at the language, any office under the United States.
Yes, but doesn't that at least suggest ambiguity? And this sort of ties into Justice Kavanaugh's point. In other words, we had a person right there at the time saying what I'm saying. The language here doesn't seem to include president. Why is that? And so if there's an ambiguity, why would we construe it to, as Justice Kavanaugh pointed out, against democracy?
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that. Even the affirmative action Supreme Court pick, Ketanji Brown Jackson, is making some sense here, okay? Even she's like, well, if this is ambiguous, why would we skew it against democracy, okay? Which has to be a stab in the heart for Democrats, right? Any Democrat hearing that, they have to be like, damn, the black woman, even the woke black woman is like, what we're doing is anti-democratic, right? So much for banning Trump from the ballot, overthrowing democracy to save democracy, right? Which is what Democrats essentially are arguing that we should do, okay? You had Justice Clarence Thomas asking the woke lawyer about if there's ever a time or does he know an example of states after the Civil War banning Confederates from federal ballots, okay? Because his argument is essentially is that, well, if this applies, that states can just do this, which is ironic and kind of nonsensical considering the fact that the whole point of that clause there is to stop Confederates from being able to hold federal office positions. And you just had a Civil War where you had these states that essentially rebelled against the Union. So leaving it up to these states that just rebelled against the Union, again, doesn't really make sense. After the Civil War, then you should have seen states banning Confederates from federal ballots, okay? And that lawyer couldn't give an example of that happening, which basically supports the idea that this is something that should be left to the federal government, to Congress, okay? And this is, again, why we have the impeachment process, okay? This is why we went through the Senate trial in which Trump was found to be innocent. And if they would have found him guilty, they could have banned him from ever running for office again, right? They could have did that. We already have a mechanism for doing that. This belongs to Congress, not to the state. So that being said, again, these arguments went so bad that even MSNBC is throwing in the towel, basically saying that, yeah, clearly there are going to be 5 votes in favor of overturning this Colorado decision to ban Trump from the ballot. Basically, he's going to be on the ballot, right? This is not going to work out. And that suggests that these other cases from these liberal states are also probably not going to work out in the Supreme Court either.
Andrew, let me ask you first, because it seemed to us in listening to this so closely for the last 2 hours, 19 minutes or so, that there was broad agreement across the usual political division lines that there was a lot of ambiguity in this process and that ambiguity would favor keeping the candidate, Donald Trump, on the ballot.
Well, duh, right, duh. That should have been apparent from the beginning. Even Ketanji Brown Jackson admitted it, right? That this is ambiguous. So why would we side against democracy when it's not very clear in regards to how this applies, especially considering how Trump has not been charged with an act of insurrection or convicted. Nobody surrounding the events of January 6th has been charged with an insurrection. So what is the justification for doing something like this, considering the ambiguous nature of what we're basing it off of? And we don't have any precedents to suggest that this actually really makes sense, that states should be allowed to keep people off federal ballots. Again, it just doesn't make sense. It never made sense.
I agree with you. My takeaway from this is you're counting the votes. Remember, Justice O'Connor famously said when she was asked what's it like to be on the Supreme Court, it's about counting to 5. Here, there is clearly, I think, 5 votes, if not 9 votes, that are going to reverse this case.
Wow.
The point that you made about ambiguity.
And this says a whole lot about the woke activist state Supreme Court, Colorado, that made this decision in the first place. Okay, it tells you everything you need to know. These people were acting as woke activists, okay? They weren't acting as real judges that were unbiased. No, they were liberal activists working on behalf of the Democrat Party, trying to overthrow democracy. It's amazing.
Was raised by various justices, meaning that if it's not clear, shouldn't that sort of favor having somebody being allowed to run and thus our ability to vote for that person? There was a lot of concern about having a state have the power to interfere with a federal election. It's not a state interfering with a state election. It's should they really be able to weigh in on this? And then there was an interesting sort of across, as your point, across different justices, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Thomas, who is very active in this oral argument, talking about the history of this amendment, talking about how it really dealt with the Confederacy and the concern about Confederates burrowing in to Confederate states and sort of influencing federal elections. And so it would be anomalous. It would be ironic to suddenly say, oh, this is sort of, we should allow states to take this on. It's a reason to have federal jurisdiction here, not state jurisdiction. Big takeaway is this is, I think, going to be a win for Donald Trump and a loss for Colorado.
And it was so interesting, Anna, that...
Yeah. So you seen that, you heard that. Okay, even the mainstream liberal media is thrown in the towel, right? They're saying, yeah, this is a win for Trump. This ain't going to work. So, yeah, this is one attack from the establishment, from the Democrats, from the left against Trump that's going down, right? This is not going to work. And, you know, at least as of right now, it seems like this is how the Supreme Court is going to rule. So now Trump doesn't have to worry about this. He still needs to worry about the Jack Smith case. Maybe he needs to worry about what's going on in Georgia. Maybe the classified documents case, which, by the way, we really got to talk about that. Okay, it's actually insane what's happening with Biden's classified document case. But, hey, this is good news for Trump. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.